The project finished 2 days early. An environmental review up in Sudbury that everyone at the office had budgeted 3 weeks for came back clean on the first pass. No flags, no complications, no political delay from the municipal side. My regional director told me to take the long weekend. I almost stayed. There's a half-decent hockey bar near the hotel, and the poutine was genuinely good. But I'd been gone for 11 days, and 11 days is a long time to be away from someone you're planning to marry in 5 months. I didn't text my fiancée, I wanted it to be a surprise. I drove to the airport, caught the last connection back to Toronto. Landed just after 10 at night. On the way out of Pearson I stopped at the Tim Hortons in the terminal. And bought 2 large double doubles. She had this thing about airport Tims. She said it tasted worse and better at the same time, like a time machine back to our university years. I carried both cups through the parking garage feeling like someone who had their life sorted out. I was 33 years old. Good job. Great apartment in the annex. A wedding date locked in at a venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake. A woman I genuinely believed was the best person I'd ever been with. I let myself in quietly, because I thought she might be asleep. If she wasn't asleep. The living room was dark, except for the lamp. She kept on a timer by the window. Her running shoes were by the door, kicked off the way she always did, one on its side. I set the coffees on the kitchen counter and stood there for a second, just listening to the apartment. There's a specific kind of quiet a home has when no one's in it. This wasn't that kind of quiet. There were voices from the bedroom. 2 of them. I recognized the second one immediately. It was my best friend's. I've known Gavin since we were 19. We met in a statics lab at the University of Waterloo in second year, where neither of us could crack a load distribution problem until 3 in the morning when I finally worked it out and walked him through it. He was my person after that. My chosen best man. The guy I called when my father had his cardiac scare 2 winters ago. The guy I co-signed a mortgage for when he bought his condo on King West. Because his credit history was tissue thin, and no lender in the city would touch him on his own. I stood in the hallway outside my bedroom door, for what felt like a very long time. Then I opened it. I'm not going to describe exactly what I saw, because it doesn't need describing. The scene arranged itself in my mind, in about half a second and stayed there, permanent, like a photo that can't be undeveloped. What I remember most is that neither of them moved right away. They just froze. My fiancée went completely white. Gavin's face cycled through about 6 expressions in 3 seconds. It landing somewhere between guilty and desperate. I didn't speak. I looked at them for a moment. Then I looked around the room. His jacket was draped over my chair. His shoes were on my side of the bed. A bottle of Cabernet Franc from the case we'd bought together at a winery in Niagara last summer was open on the dresser, 2 glasses nearby, mostly empty. They'd been comfortable. This wasn't a moment of weakness. You don't get that comfortable in one night. Something settled in my chest. Something cold and very, very clear. I turned around and walked to the closet. My fiancée started crying before I'd even reached for a bag. She was saying my name in the exact tone I'd spent 3 years learning to love. And I moved around her like she was a piece of furniture. I took my laptop and its charger. I pulled the fireproof box from the top shelf. Passport, SIN card, T4s, insurance documents. I grabbed 5 days of clothes, my toiletries, my good running shoes. Gavin was in the doorway by then holding the frame. He said, "Man, please, just let me." "Don't," I said. That was all. I zipped the bag, picked it up, walked past both of them, and out the front door and let it close behind me. With a quiet click that sounded much louder than it was. I checked into a hotel near Spadina. Extended stay. I handed my credit card to the front desk clerk with a steady hand, rode the elevator to the 6th floor, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry. I wasn't numb, I just wasn't ready to feel it. And my brain seemed to understand that. So it rerouted everything into something more useful. I opened my laptop at 2 in the morning. I didn't open a journal, I opened Excel. I built a new workbook. Named it Exit Protocol Duxless. Clean grid, 4 columns. Name, connection, action, required status. I listed every professional introduction I had ever made on Gavin's behalf. Every developer I'd brought him to at industry events. Every contact at the city planning office I'd personally vouched for him with when his portfolio was empty. I listed every client I'd sent to my fiancée's HR consulting practice. 3 companies in particular that had been with her for over a year. All tech startups I'd connected her to through colleagues at my firm. I listed the co-signed mortgage on Gavin's King West condo. The line of credit my father carried that listed me as guarantor. The HELOC my parents had drawn against their Oakville house that Scotiabank had approved, based partly on my income documentation. I stared at the spreadsheet for a long time. Then I started filling in the action required column. My mother called. At 8:45 the next morning, I was in the Tim Hortons drive-thru on Bloor, watching the lineup move, and I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice told me everything before she'd said a word. She was upset, but not the way I needed her to be upset. Sweetheart. She exhaled the word like she'd been holding it. Gavin called us last night. He called your father and me and he could barely even talk. I said nothing. So. He made a terrible mistake, she said. A horrible, devastating mistake. He knows that. But sweetheart, this is Gavin. We've known that boy since he was 21 years old. He is not a bad person. He made a terrible choice and he is completely devastated. I hear you, I said. And I did hear her. I heard every word. I also heard what she wasn't saying. That Gavin's devastation was part of the equation. That his pain mattered and needed to be factored into how I was allowed to respond to mine. She spoke for a long time after that. She talked about forgiveness, about how no one is their worst moment, about how my fiancé was also struggling, and how they were both so sorry. She mentioned the wedding deposits. She said my father wanted to sit down with everyone. She said Gavin's name 3 more times on the way to goodbye. I'm just saying, she said finally, that you're so logical usually, you see the big picture. I do, I said. I told her I'd think about it. She sounded genuinely relieved. I hung up and sat in the parking lot and drank my coffee until it went cold. My sister texted me at noon. She's 2 years older and has always been the temperature reader in our family. Not a pushover, not an instigator, just the person who knows the exact weight of every room she walks into. Her text said, I heard, I'm so sorry, where are you okay? I called her back. I'm okay, I said, which was true and not true simultaneously. I'm not going to tell you what to do, she said. But I'm also not going to pretend I'm not furious. I know. What do you need from me? I thought about it. I need someone who can keep me informed about what's happening at home. What mom and dad know, what Gavin's saying, what her situation is. Can you do that? A pause. Yeah, she said. I can do that. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. They're going to be unbearable about this. She was right, but I already knew that. Within 6 weeks I was in Vancouver. The transfer wasn't complicated. My firm has a major office on West Georgia Street, and I'd been informally considering a West Coast move for almost a year. Toronto's market had become genuinely unlivable, and the Pacific Division was expanding into infrastructure contracts I actually wanted to work on. I called my director, told him I needed a change of scenery without elaborating, and he moved faster than I expected. 3 weeks of logistics. 1 cross-country flight. 1 furnished sublet in Yaletown while I found something permanent. I ended up in Kitsilano. 2nd floor of a converted character building with long kitchen windows that caught the afternoon light off English Bay. I bought entirely new furniture. Nothing from the old life. Not the rug, not the throw cushions. Not the second-hand bookshelf she'd picked at a flea market on Kensington. I wanted the new apartment to feel like a place I actually inhabited. Not a grieving man's museum. I found a new running route along the seawall. A coffee shop that opened at 6. I started working harder than I'd ever worked. Partially because the work was genuinely interesting. And partially because focusing on load calculations and infrastructure assessments left no bandwidth for the images I was trying to keep at the edges of my mind. In the background, very quietly, I opened the spreadsheet. 2 months after I moved, my sister sent me a photo. It was a casual shot from a family barbecue in Oakville. My parents were in the backyard. My father had the tongs. My mother was laughing at something. Gavin and my fiancé were there, side by side in lawn chairs, his hand on her knee. I zoomed in on her wrist. She was wearing a bracelet I'd given her for her birthday. A simple gold bangle from a jeweler on Queen Street West. She was wearing my gift at my parents' backyard barbecue while sitting next to the man she'd cheated on me with. My sister's message said, I'm so sorry. I didn't know they were going to invite them. Mom said it was just supposed to be family healing. I left after an hour. I feel sick. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I closed it and opened a different contact. Warren Choi was a development director at a mid-size real estate firm in Toronto. I'd introduced him to Gavin at a Civic Tech Gala 18 months earlier. Gavin had been working to position himself as a connector between engineering firms and residential developers, and Warren was exactly the contact who could make that reputation real. I'd vouched for Gavin personally. Warren trusted me because I'd never given him reason not to. I called Warren on a Tuesday afternoon from my office in Vancouver. How's the West Coast treating you? He asked. Can't complain. Listen, are you still in the early stages with Gavin on the Etobicoke proposal? Nothing signed yet. Still running the numbers. Why? I've been looking at a few other partnership structures that might be a better fit for your Q1 targets. Firms with stronger capital backing and cleaner track records. I'd like to set up a call to walk you through what I'm seeing. There was a pause. Warren was not a slow man. He understood what wasn't being said. Send me the calendar link, he said. I did. 2 weeks later, my sister texted. Gavin mentioned something about a big deal going sideways. He seems stressed. I replied, hope he figures it out. My fiancée's consulting practice had 3 anchor clients when we were together. All of them tech startups I'd connected her to through my professional network. The most significant was a series company in the Waterloo corridor, whose head of people ops I'd known since grad school. The contract was worth roughly $4,000 a month and had been running for over a year. I called my contact at that company in early spring. We talked about his expansion plans, his hiring needs, his company's shift toward a remote-first model. Near the end of the call, I mentioned I'd recently met an organizational consultant in Vancouver who'd been doing exactly this kind of work as companies scaled past 50 people. I'd love to connect you too, I said. Her work with distributed teams is genuinely impressive. Yes, send her along, he said. I introduced them by email that same afternoon. Professionally, warmly. The kind of introduction that gets a meeting booked inside a week. 6 weeks later, my sister texted. She mentioned she lost a big client at dinner tonight. She was crying. Said money's gotten really tight. I replied, that's rough. I opened the spreadsheet and changed the status cell from pending to complete. The financial threads required a different kind of precision. Legal, clean, attributable to nothing but standard procedure. My parents had a HELOC against their Oakville house. A home equity line of credit with Scotiabank. They'd used primarily to renovate the kitchen and fund 2 winters down south. The approved limit was $85,000. The bank had signed off on the line, partly because of my income documentation, which I'd submitted when they set it up 3 years ago. I was listed as a guarantor on the account. In July, I called Scotiabank's lending division and requested the formal documentation to have myself removed as guarantor. The representative was straightforward. She said, my parents would receive written notice and would need to either pay down the outstanding balance, refinance, on their own merits, or demonstrate sufficient income to carry the obligation independently. Given my father's consulting income, which had always been irregular and had become more so since an investment gone wrong the previous year, I knew exactly what the bank's assessment would find. Gavin's King West mortgage was a different kind of problem, but not a complicated one. I'd co-signed 4 years ago when his credit profile wouldn't carry the loan alone. Co-signing a mortgage in Canada means you're equally on the hook for the debt. There's no quiet exit. But over 4 years of payments, he'd built some history. The issue was that in the same period he'd layered on other obligations. A car loan, a business line of credit, and what my sister quietly told me were several private loans he'd taken on to bridge his income when deals slowed down. When the annual mortgage review came up in August, I didn't renew my co-signing agreement. The bank contacted Gavin directly. He would need to requalify on his own with his current income, which was considerably less stable than it had been the year before. 4 months after the dinner confrontation, I was already planning in my head. My sister called instead of texted. She kept her voice low. Things are actually bad, she said. Like genuinely bad. Gavin had lost 2 more development deals in the same month. He was working constantly but producing nothing. She'd seen him at my parents' place twice. In 1 week looking hollowed out. 15 pounds lighter. Wired in a way that had nothing to do with confidence. My fiancée had taken on a part-time administrative contract because the consulting income wasn't making rent. They'd had a fight at my mother's dinner table that required physical intervention to de-escalate. Mom's calling it growing pains, my sister said. Sure, I said. A pause. You're not going to tell me what you've been doing? No. Okay, she said quietly. I trust you. Isabel came into my life in October, which I hadn't planned and didn't particularly expect. She was a commercial litigator at a firm in downtown Vancouver, introduced to me at a Pacific Infrastructure conference by a mutual colleague. She was direct to the point of being slightly alarming, which I found immediately refreshing. We got drinks, then dinner, then a Saturday morning hike up the Grouse Grind, where she beat my time on the climb by 4 minutes, and found it considerably funnier than I did. I didn't tell her my whole story. She didn't ask for it. She had her own full life and no interest in performing as anyone's therapist. We existed comfortably around each other, which was more than I'd been able to say about most things in a long time. I was still building something that was genuinely mine. When my mother called in November, this time, her voice was completely different. She wasn't crying. She wasn't performing hopefulness. She just said, "We need you to come home." I flew in on a Friday. I didn't tell anyone I'd arrived a day early. I checked into a hotel downtown, ordered room service, and slept for 9 hours without interruption. Saturday I got a haircut. Took my time getting dressed. Dark jeans, a good flannel over a clean white shirt. The watch I'd bought myself when the Vancouver promotion came through. I looked like someone who had not been having a difficult year. I drove to my parents' house in Oakville, at 5:45 exactly. My mother opened the front door before I'd reached the porch. The change in her appearance hit me harder than I'd prepared for. She looked smaller, worn in a way that wasn't just physical. She reached forward to hug me and I let her hold me, but I kept my arms at my sides. I didn't lean in. I stood there until she stepped back. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast. My childhood comfort meal. I noticed it the second I crossed the threshold, and almost laughed out loud at the transparency of it. My father was in the dining room. He stood and shook my hand, firm, formal, like he was meeting a business contact, which meant he was nervous. My sister was there with her partner. She caught my eye from across the room and gave me the smallest possible nod. And then I saw Gavin at the far end of the table, my fiancée beside him. No one had warned me they'd be there, or I hadn't asked. Gavin looked like he'd dropped 15 pounds. Dark circles, sloped posture, a stillness in him that wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness you have when you've been keeping yourself very controlled for a long time. He tried to smile when I walked in and it came out wrong. She kept her eyes on the tablecloth. The bracelet was gone from her wrist. I sat down, asked for water. My mother brought it in a nice glass, hands trembling slightly. We ate. The conversation was the strained, over-careful kind where everyone is performing normalcy, and no one is particularly convincing. My father made a comment about the CFL standings that went nowhere. My sister asked politely about the Vancouver rental market. I gave two-word answers and cut my pot roast into precise even pieces. About 20 minutes in, my father set down his fork. I think, he said in the voice he used when he was about to be formal about something, it's time we addressed what's in the room. I looked at him. Waited. You're here, he said. That means something. That means you're ready to move forward. And if we're all honest, people are human, they make mistakes. And what matters now is how we choose to rebuild. I haven't said I'm ready to move forward, I said. The table went quiet. My mother started to speak. I raised one hand, palm out. She stopped. I'm going to say something, I said. I'd like everyone to let me finish. The room went still. Even Gavin, who'd been drawing breath to interject, settled back. I looked at him first. Warren Choi, I said. That connection was mine. I took you to that infrastructure gala, introduced you to Warren personally, told him you were someone worth backing, when your portfolio was essentially empty. The Etobicoke proposal. The 2 development partnerships after that. Every significant opportunity you've had in the last 2 years traces back to a room I got you into. Gavin's jaw moved. Nothing came out. I turned to my fiancée. The Waterloo contract. Her face drained. Rideau Systems. Pelham Group. All 3 came from my network. People who hired you because I called them personally and told them you were talented and reliable. That was your practice. That was your income for 14 months. She looked at her lap. I turned to my parents. My father had gone very still. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth. The HELOC on this house, I said quietly. The $85,000 line you used for the kitchen renovation and the winter trips. Scotiabank approved it because my income was on file as guarantor. I removed myself from that guarantee in July. They would have notified you in August. I looked at my father directly. Given your current consulting income, refinancing on your own is going to be very difficult. My mother made a small sound. I also didn't renew the co-signing agreement on Gavin's mortgage in August, I said. He'll need to requalify independently. Based on his income situation, and the private loans he's been servicing, I don't think that requalification is going to go well. You can't just, Gavin started. I haven't broken a single law, I said. I haven't made a complaint. I haven't called anyone. I haven't said a negative word about any of you to anyone in this city. I simply stopped doing things I was doing voluntarily, without being asked and without being thanked. My father pushed back his chair and stood. His face had gone a color I didn't like. This is vindictive. This is deliberate cruelty. You're punishing this entire family because of something that happened between 2 people. You took his side, I said. Factually. He stopped. The morning after I found them in my bedroom, you called me to manage my reaction. 6 weeks later you hosted a barbecue for them in this backyard. You put them at this table tonight. You made your position clear, and I respected it. I'm just making mine equally clear. We are your family, my mother said. Her voice broke on the last word. And family, as you've explained to me repeatedly over the past year, is something you stand by through its worst moments. I looked at her steadily. I'm just not anyone's worst moment's collateral damage anymore. The room was completely silent. I looked at Gavin one last time. He was staring at the tablecloth. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man slowly understanding, for the first time, that the floor beneath him had never been his. I stood up, straightened my shirt, picked up my jacket. I don't hate any of you, I said to the room. I want to be clear about that. What I did because every person at this table made a choice. Gavin made his, she made hers, you made yours. I looked at my parents. I made mine. I'm the only one who was honest about it from the start. Tonight I'm just being honest. About the rest of it. I walked out of the dining room. My father called after me. My mother was crying. Gavin said my name once in a hollow, unfamiliar voice. I walked down the hallway, past the family photos on the wall, past the coats on the rack, and the shoes on the mat. And I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold November air. And pulled it quietly shut behind me. My sister caught up to me on the front path. She didn't say anything. She just put her hand on my arm for a moment, then let go. Through the front window I could see shapes moving behind the curtains. My father pacing. My mother in her armchair. Gavin standing in the center of the room with his hands at his sides, like a man trying to remember what to do with them now. I got in my rental car, backed out of the driveway, drove toward the highway. I flew home Sunday morning. Isabel picked me up at YVR with coffee, and we drove back to Kitsilano without talking much, which was exactly right. The updates from my sister came regularly over the next several months. She kept them factual, clean, free of manipulation. 2 months after the dinner, Gavin had failed to requalify for his mortgage. He'd applied twice and been declined both times. He was renting the King West condo short-term to cover payments and living in a shared house in Parkdale. The private loans he'd taken on to bridge his business income were past due. A collections action was pending from one of the lenders. 3 months. My fiancée had moved back to her parents' place in Guelph. The part-time contract had ended. She and Gavin had, from what my sister could piece together, stopped speaking. The last time my mother mentioned them together, it was to say the relationship had become complicated. 4 months. My parents had listed the Oakville house, downsizing to a 2-bedroom condo in Burlington, which my mother was framing to her friends as a lifestyle simplification. My sister had seen the numbers. It wasn't a choice. I read every message. I replied with short, warm, informative responses, and never asked follow-up questions. I never said the word karma. I never felt something I would describe as satisfaction. I felt something closer to physics, the clean, indifferent operation of cause and effect, running its course from 2,000 kilometers away. In March, 8 months after the dinner, I was promoted to regional director for the Pacific Division, youngest to hold the title in the firm's BC history. My director shook my hand in a glass-walled boardroom, overlooking Burrard Inlet, and said something about sustained vision and consistent execution. I shook a lot of hands, went back to my office, and kept working. On my lunch break I opened the spreadsheet. Every cell, in the status column, read complete. I saved the file, moved it to an archive folder, closed the laptop. A few weeks after the promotion, Isabel and I were on her apartment patio, on a Saturday evening. The North Shore Mountains were doing the thing they do in April, snow line still high, the water below it catching the last of the day's light. She was working through a legal brief. I was holding a glass of rye and not thinking about much. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, without looking up. "Good quiet or bad quiet?" "Haven't decided." I looked out at the water. My sister texted earlier. My parents closed on the house. She put the brief down and looked at me. She knew enough of the outline of my past to understand what that meant, without knowing every detail. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. I thought about that. Actually thought about it. "I don't feel like I did something to them," I said. "I feel like I stopped doing something for them. And everything that came after that was just gravity doing what gravity does." She nodded slowly. "Do you wish any of it had been different?" I turned the glass in my hands. I wish I hadn't spent years quietly holding up people who never once looked down to see whose hands were under them, I said. But no. I don't wish I'd handled it differently. Isabel picked up her brief again. After a moment she said, "For what it's worth, the man who finally stopped carrying all of that sounds like someone worth building something real with." I looked at the mountains, across the water. The snow line was clean and high, and everything below it was new green. I'd spent years reinforcing other people's foundations. It turned out I build much better when I'm the only one I'm building for.